So good afternoon. I'm Maravilla Clemens. I am the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Coastal Management Fellow at the California State Coastal Conservancy, and I'm going to be the program manager for this round of the Community Wetlands Grant Program. So right now I'll go ahead and let my colleague Sally G introduce herself as well.
Good morning. My name is Sally G. I'm a project development analyst with the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy in Los Angeles and helping Maravilla present today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sally. So in today's webinar, we will provide an overview of the Community Wetland Restoration Grant Program, and that is quite the mouthful. So we're going to go ahead and shorten that to the CWRGP for the rest of the presentation. And we will be discussing the background of the CWRGP, the 2023 grant round in details, and we'll also be going over the application guidelines, the template, and the selection criteria, as well as what you can expect if you are selected as a 2023 grantee. And just some general housekeeping, we will address questions regarding the application and anything else we've discussed during the webinar at the end in a Q&A format. But please feel free to input any questions you have in the chat box as they come up throughout the webinar, and we'll answer them all at the end during that Q&A session. And just so everyone is aware, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Coastal Conservancy YouTube webpage and linked on our website. So program background, the Southern California Wetlands Recovery Project, or the WRP for short, is a partnership of 18 state and federal agencies chaired by the California Natural Resources Agency and supported by the California State Coastal Conservancy. Through the WRP partnership, public agencies, scientists, and local communities work cooperatively to support and facilitate acquisition, enhancement, and restoration of wetlands in coastal Southern California. So this slide shows the geographic extent of the Wetland Recovery Project region, which stretches from Point Conception in the Santa Barbara subregion all the way down to the US-Mexico border. And each coastal wetland is represented by a red dot on this map, and non-tidal wetlands are shown as individual blue dots, which create a watershed network across the region. And the CWRGP is a program under the Southern California Wetlands Recovery Project that is focused on community-based preservation and restoration projects. The 2018 WRP Regional Strategy is a document that articulates long-term goals and specific implementation strategies to help guide wetland restoration for the WRP over the next few decades in order to improve wetland resilience to climate change as well as other stressors. And the regional strategy does include quantitative objectives to help the WRP track success over time. The Community Wetlands Restoration Grant Program supports achieving goals 1 through 3 of the regional strategy by restoring coastal wetlands, streams, adjacent habitats, and other non-tidal wetlands. And while it does support goals 1 through 3, the CWRGP definitely has a specific emphasis on objective 1 of goal 3, support community-based restoration projects. Since 2001, the CWRGP provided over $4 million in funding to over 170 community-based restoration projects in coastal wetlands and along coastal stream corridors in the Southern California region. There was a pause in the request for proposals over the past few years to undergo a programmatic evaluation. During this time, a gap assessment was conducted in which we determined who funding has gone to in the past and where those projects were located, as well as who hasn't received funding and what areas historically have seen a lack of CWRGP projects. We also solicited feedback from former grantees and worked with program partners to re-envision the program with the overall goals of reaching a broader audience, funding wetland restoration projects that are rooted in and benefit underserved communities, and improve support for capacity building. Historically, this program has been funded by various agencies and organizations, but going forward, the CWRGP will be administered by the State Coastal Conservancy and funded by the Coastal Conservancy, the Wildlife Conservation Board, and the San Gabriel and Lower Los Angeles Rivers and Mountains Conservancy. The green flags on this map highlight past CWRGP project locations, which span the extent of the South Coast region. And you can find out more about these projects on our website. I do want to note that this map does not yet include our 2022 grantee project locations, but we are excited to have those coming to the website soon. And program priorities. So there are a total of 4 CWRGP program priorities. The first is to engage CWRGP priority communities to restore or enhance coastal wetlands and coastal stream corridors. These priority communities include, but are not limited to, lower income individuals and households, people with disabilities, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, immigrant communities, and other historically marginalized communities. There are a number of tools that have been developed to help identify these priority communities, such as Cal Enviro Screen, California State Parks Community Fact Finder, and the California Department of Water Resources. These are all mapping tools, and we will include links to these mapping tools in the chat. The second priority is to implement restoration projects that have strong community benefits, such as community engagement, education, workforce development, career development, and leadership development. The third priority is to demonstrate community-led planning and implementation of habitat restoration projects that are anchored in community expertise. Examples of this can include community leaders, community-based organizations, tribal members, local planners, or local and state government officials. And the fourth priority is to increase organizational capacity to plan and implement habitat restoration projects. And for the second part of this presentation, which focuses on the CWRGP 2023 grant cycle, I will be passing it off to Sally.
Thanks. So I'll go over first the eligible applicants. So 501c3 nonprofits, local government agencies, including city and county entities, federally recognized tribes, and public and nonprofit universities are eligible to apply for this grant program. Eligible projects that the program would support include restoration of or preservation of coastal wetland, coastal stream corridors, or other non-tidal wetlands, such as vernal pools. And this must be a primary goal of the project. And this project area must be in the Southern California region. The projects must also involve a community component in restoration implementation, as well as have an educational component. So the next slide. For this grant round, we'll have approximately $350,000 available for 2023. Our maximum project award is $100,000, and we anticipate to award 4 to 6 projects for this round of funding, ranging from $30,000 to a maximum of $100,000. However, more projects may be selected dependent on the number of applications we receive. Next slide. And so through this, through this program, the RMC is particularly interested in funding community restoration projects along the lower Los Angeles River corridor, which is outlined in red on the map. This area is 1.5 miles from either side of the river corridor and its tributaries, the Rio Hondo River and Compton Creek. And while the program guidelines say that this area is a priority area, the CWRGP is accepting proposals throughout the Southern California region. So for project duration, The project timeline may have a maximum of 3 years, and the timeline should start by winter of 2023 or 2024, and projects must be completed by December of 2026. In previous grant rounds, there are plenty of examples of what project types we have funded. So these are 3 examples from different wetlands and areas, coastal areas along the Southern California coast. And all of these programs included activities such as installation of native plants, removal of non-native vegetation, seeding and propagation for restoration, trash abatement, and establishment of educational kiosks. All these projects also involve students, families, or community members in habitat restoration events, or host educational field trips that foster knowledge about wetlands conservation, indigenous significance of the land, wildlife, vegetation, water quality, and monitoring information as well. Eligible projects examples also include conducting professional development workshops for teachers to learn about wetland ecology, stormwater runoff, and watersheds in their own classes. Some other considerations for applications are that the State Coast Conservancy will not award more than 1 CWRGP grant per applicant. Projects proposed for transitional upland habitat must demonstrate a clear connection and benefit to the adjacent wetland habitat. If the applicant is not the landowner of the site, the applicant will need to provide evidence of landowner approval prior to project implementation. And lastly, grant recipients may be required to enter up to 15 to 20-year grant agreements to ensure long-term protection of the project site. For example, is basically to ensure that the restored property is operated and maintained for the purpose of the project for that duration. In terms of what the CWRGP won't be able to fund, then next slide. And so what the CWRGP can't fund are solely experimental or restoration projects, solely construction projects, or solely recreational activities. The project must have that community restoration component. The program cannot fund ongoing monitoring and maintenance projects unless those activities are tied to a specific restoration project to ensure the success of the project, and that monitoring or establishment period must be completed within the duration of the project, which is a max of 3 years. Next slide. And so for our program selection criteria, we are evaluating projects on the extent to which the project will restore coastal wetlands, streams, adjacent habitats, and other non-tidal wetlands. The extent to which the project will advance hands-on community involvement in a wetland restoration project, particularly involvement from our priority communities beyond the traditionally engaged environmental groups. Third, the degree to which the project will help build the applicant's capacity to plan and implement wetlands restoration projects. Fourth, the extent to which the project will foster education about wetlands ecosystems and the impacts and threats to those ecosystems. Fifth, the extent to which the project demonstrates broader community interest, involvement, and support. And lastly, the applicant's experience and capacity to implement the project and provide long-term protection agreements. Now I'll turn it back over to Marvilla.
Thank you, Sally. So if you are interested in applying for this grant cycle, these are the important dates to remember. Applications are due by May 12th, 2023 at 5 p.m. Pacific time, after which there will be an application review by the selection committee. Provisional notification of award or denial will be sent to applicants by July of 2023, and selected project proposals are to be presented to the Coastal Conservancy Board for funding approval in September or November of 2023. Following board approval, the Coastal Conservancy will enter into grant agreements and develop work programs with successful applicants in the winter of 2023. And it is anticipated that funding will become available to grantees by January or February 2024, at which point the project can begin. And the grant application guidelines are meant to provide more detailed information and complement the application template. I highly encourage applicants to read through the guidelines before beginning to fill out the template. It's a really useful document, and we do update it yearly. So even if you've applied before, I really recommend looking through that again. And both the guidelines and the template documents can be downloaded from the CWRGP webpage. And for ease, we'll drop that link to the website page into the chat. And when you do go to that website page, this is what it looks like. The arrows are pointing to the links for downloading both the application guidelines and the application template. And a complete proposal will contain the following 4 sections. The first is the application cover page. The second is the project narrative, which is a maximum of 6 pages. The third is your project budget. And the fourth will be any additional attachments that you include. And right now I'm going to spend a little bit of time going over each of these sections in a little bit more detail. So the application cover page will include basic information about the project, including contact information, a summary of the project, and information about the location of the project. Section 2, the project narrative, will again be a maximum of 6 pages and has 13 questions to address. The first is the need for the project. The second is on CWRGP priorities. The third is the project description. The fourth is on CWRGP priority community engagement. The fifth is a site description. The sixth is on project readiness. The seventh is a CEQA status. And fourth is on permits. The 9th is on specific tasks, while the 10th asks how success will be measured. The 11th asks about partnerships and collaborations that you might have, and the 12th is on tribal engagement. And I want to go into a bit more detail here, as this is a new question that we added to the application template this year. So we encourage that projects communicate, consult, or engage with tribes traditionally and culturally affiliated to the project area throughout the development and implementation of the project, particularly if the project applicant is not a tribe. The Coastal Conservancy will also be initiating consultation requests with tribal governments for any selected projects prior to recommending the project for funding to our board. And lastly, the 13th question is on applicant experience and capacity. Section 3 is on the project budget. So the budget can support a range of activities. We do suggest modifying the task titles to fit the project as appropriate, as well as adding or removing rows as necessary. And please note that organizational capacity, workforce development, and project planning and development activities must be related to wetland restoration project activities, and that altogether they must not total more than 50% of the total funding amount requested from the WRP. And just a reminder that all of this is listed in the application guidelines. So if you remember one thing from this webinar, please have it be to use those guidelines to your advantage as you're filling out the template. And the final section is section 4, which is on attachments. This refers to additional documents or photos that you should include, such as a regional and site scale map that shows the location of project elements, and 1, 2, 3 project photos that provide more detail as to what the project sites look like. In addition, nonprofit applicants should include the following with their applications: a letter of determination from the Internal Revenue Service indicating current IRS 501c3 status, as well as a completed nonprofit organization pre-award questionnaire. And I do want to note that applicants who have submitted the nonprofit questionnaire in the past 2 years do not need to resubmit it this year. Electronic submissions must be emailed to me by 5 p.m. May 12th, 2023, and my contact information is on the webpage. All files should be uploaded as a single file in Microsoft Word or converted to a PDF file. And please name the electronic file by the project name and make sure the files are not excessively large. If electronic submission is not possible, hard copy applications must be postmarked by May 12th, 2023, and sent to me at the address indicated in the application package. And I've received some questions around what will be required of projects if they are selected. So before work can begin, the Conservancy does need the following documents: a grant agreement, a board resolution, which must be signed by the appropriate authorities at your organization, an insurance policy certificate that shows the required types and levels of insurance, lists the state of California as an additional insured, and references your Coastal Conservancy grant agreement number. And this is something that your insurance agent should be able to provide for you. And lastly, you'll need a work program, which details the specific tasks, deliverables, project schedule, and task level budget for your project. And the work program can be amended over time if changes are needed. And for invoicing to the Conservancy to get reimbursed, you will include a completed request for disbursement form and a progress report describing work done during the billing period. And just so everyone is aware, further instructions for all of these requirements, as well as templates for the board resolution and work program, can be found in the grantee manual, which you can find on our website. And additionally, you will have an assigned project manager from the Coastal Conservancy who can assist you with meeting these requirements. So there's a lot of support in getting these requirements met if that's something that you need. And as I believe I mentioned earlier, I will be the primary contact for the CWRGP this year. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions as you start your applications. And just a reminder that if you're unsure if your project meets the CWRGP requirements, you can send me a 1 to 2 paragraph description of your project or request a call prior to completing and submitting a complete application. And also the CWRGP website has an abundance of additional information, as well as a project board, which has information from past projects. And I believe we have some time left for questions, so please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we are happy to answer any that you have. And we do have our colleague Katie Nichols from the State Coastal Conservancy online here to help us answer any questions that you might have. And thank you for putting those links in the chat, Katie.
And if folks want to ask questions, they can raise their hand and we can promote you to talk, or you can also pop questions in the chat.
And we don't have any questions yet, but let's give it a few minutes in case people are typing them in. Okay, I see that Liliana raised her hand.
Liliana, you should be able to ask your question now.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Well, first, thank you so much for hosting this. This was super helpful and informative. I have 2 questions. The first one is, I know there's a slight emphasis on projects around the lower LA River. But I was wondering, in terms of the funding, like what percentage of the funding will be going to projects for the lower LA River, and what percentage would go to the rest of Southern California area, if you know that.
So we don't have a clear percentage, since we do have funds coming from the Rivers Mountain Conservancy, the Wildlife Conservation Board, and the Coastal Conservancy. What happens is that the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy has this priority area where their funding will go to, and then there could be, if there's a number of projects in that area, funding also coming from the Wildlife Conservation Board and the Coastal Conservancy that goes towards that area as well. So it's not an exact percentage. It's more how we deal with those funds coming from all of these different organizations. But especially the Coastal Conservancy money, as well as the Wildlife Conservation Board funds, aren't beholden to that specific region. So we really encourage anyone who's interested that meets the selection criteria requirements to apply. That's more just to let folks know that we do have a specific interest, especially given RMC as our partners, in making sure that we get some projects started in that lower LA River Basin area, which has unfortunately also been an area that has historically been excluded from some of these funding opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then my second question was around matching funds, whether that was required or if it scores higher points if there's some matching funds with the project that we're proposing.
Matching funds are not required. And I do not believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, Katie, that is something that will bump your project up, is having matching funds. So especially for these smaller grant projects, we understand that a lot of the community-based organizations you might be partnering with might not have that capacity for a match. And that's why we have these CW RGP funds earmarked without any matching requirements.
Got it. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then we do have some questions in the chat. So we have Alyssa Bishop asking if it is a tribal entity requesting project approval, do they need approval from the landowner? Isn't that counterintuitive, letting a landowner be the one to make the approval over the indigenous community? I'm just going to reread this through one more time. And again, please jump in at any point, Katie. If the landowner is the owner of the land, then for legal reasons, we do need to know that the landowner will give you approval to be accessing that land for the restoration project. So that doesn't mean that the landowner is the project manager, but we would need some type of proof showing that the landowner has agreed for there to be access onto the property, and that the use of that land will not be changing in the years following the project. So many of our projects may have a 15 to 20 year lifetime period. That doesn't mean that you're needing to go on and maintain it, but it does mean that if you're using land, especially land that the organization does not own or that the applicant does not own, that the landowner will enter an agreement that says that the use of that land will not change. So if the use of that land is habitat, if the use of that land is restoration, it won't become, say, a land earmarked for development of a condominium, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question, Alyssa?
Hi. To an extent, yes. Let me formulate. So do you have any advice on, because say if there's oil extraction and that's their main form of profit, and if some of the organizations have kind of stood in opposition of certain things that maybe the landowner has been doing, are there What is are there tools or like any advice on being able to get approval for different projects or different restorations?
So I would say this sounds pretty specific to a certain landowner and a certain group. The Conservancy does have the benefit, as do our partners, of knowing a lot of the players in the WRP region, so in coastal Southern California. So I would recommend, if you have a project that you want to get started, but you have some concerns over working with the landowner, reaching out to us. We can set up a phone call and kind of figure out what might be the best steps moving forward. We don't necessarily have like guidelines for how to enter an agreement with a landowner, if that's what you're asking. But if we had a little bit more information about the project, we might be able to provide support or technical advice on that, in that regard.
Thank you. I would love to be able to send you an email and maybe get you in connection with some of the other people that I'm kind of here with or here for. Yeah.
Yeah, and I realize I did take down my contact info for this, so I'll put it in the chat just
Thank
for
you.
ease.
Awesome. And I wrote it down too. Thank you so much.
Perfect. And then we do have a question from Aaron regarding tribal engagement. Does the tribe need to be federally recognized? Definitely not. So it can also be a California recognized tribe, or it could be a tribally affiliated group or 501c3 organization. And those were all great questions. I'll give it a minute just in case anyone else is typing in the chat or has follow-up questions. Hi, Alyssa, I'm trying to unmute you, but I think you might need to do that from your end.
Okay, perfect. If there was a couple organizations that are interested in it, it would be pretty much one organization would be the main one writing out the grant, and then they can have affiliates to like express how there's community involvement.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
And I recommend that the main applicant be whoever has the greatest ease in getting things like that insurance certification and board resolution to us.
Insurance. Okay, thank you.
And I don't see any more questions coming in. Thank you so much to everyone for participating today. I'm really excited to be getting the applications coming in. Please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us, although I'm the primary contact. So with my email, reach out with any questions that you have about this process. And again, just a reminder that if you're not sure if your project meets the selection criteria and you don't want to fill out an entire application until you know, feel free to send me a brief description of your project or a request for a phone call, and we can set something up. So thank you everyone so much for attending, and this will be posted on the Coastal Conservancy webpage if anyone wants to reference it again in the future.
Thanks, everyone.